Usually when a crime happens on a cruise ship, you'd expect whoever commits that crime to be brought to justice. Usually on land, this is how most crimes go. However, on cruise ships, I've barely heard of a single conviction, unless the ship sinks or it's a really severe incident. Corporations have an incentive to keep things on the down low, and so a cruise ship is basically good as lawless. This leads into the death of Dianne Brimble, which occurred on September 23rd, 2002. Brimble and some of her friends had been saving up for over a year to go on this cruise. It would also be her first ever international cruise, and her first time being outside of Australia. The cruise going from Sydney to New Caledonia, meaning they were technically going to France. And on the 23rd of December 2002, Dianne finally departed from Australia on the Pacific Sky. Now before we move on, I just want to give a quick history of the Pacific Sky. She was originally built in 1984 to transport passengers from Britain to Australia as an ocean liner. However, she never went to Britain while with Sitmar Cruises. In fact, it was during the construction of the ship that they realized the ocean liner business was obsolete. So, for 4 years, she served with her original owner, Sitmar Cruises, as a cruise ship. In 1984, she was sold to Princess Cruises and renamed the Sky Princess. In 2000, she was sold to P&O Cruises, who renamed her the Pacific Sky, and this leads us to where the story takes place. However, we will cover her career at the end a bit. By the evening of that same day, the cruise was in open waters and everyone was enjoying themselves. Eventually, Dianne and her friends went to go eat at one of the ship's nice restaurants. Then she excused herself early and went back to one of the cabins with a man. From a group of 8 suspects, this man was selected to be Mark William due to Dianne's friend's description of the man. Apparently, Dianne and him had met at a club just after the ship had departed. The reason these 8 men were picked out as suspects we'll get into later. For 4 hours, no one saw Dianne. She sort of just disappeared. Finally, someone eventually reported Dianne as having died of a heart attack in one of the cabins. I could not find any sources saying who was the one who originally reported Dianne as dead. However, it's likely either a stewardess or Mark William himself. Without telling any of the passengers, Dianne's body was brought to the onboard morgue. It's a bit of a gruesome fact, but all ships have an onboard morgue, especially cruise ships, and they're required to by law. Even more of a gruesome fact was that the cabin that Dianne was found dead in, the body was cleaned up, and in fact the entire room was then cleaned by staff. So, when the ship arrived to port, it looked like this, just a normal cruise ship cabin after some drunk college students had stayed in it for 2 days. Then, this brings us to the end of the cruise. The cabin Dianne was found in was not her own, and in fact actually belonged to 8 men from West Australia. Dianne was found dead with 4 times the legal limit of a drug called GHB, meaning she had not been stabbed to death but rather died of a drug overdose. Then we get to the legal proceedings. Now this was a heavy source of debate in Australia, as the inquiry was very corrupt, and also P&O Cruises helped the killers in covering up the incident, although they did eventually give money to Brimble's family for the death. I'm not going to cover the entire inquiry because it is a very long and complicated topic, and also this channel is not legal, so let's move on. Now you may be asking, why is this case unsolved? If it's so clear who it was, why is it unsolved? Well, this is because it might not actually be who we think it is. Theory 1 is that Mark Williams led Dianne to his cabin, where he later gave her a lethal dose of the drug and she died. Then, he immediately left the cabin after cleaning off the crime scene, in order to cover his tracks. This all gets a bit shady when you realize that Mark William might have actually been at the pool when Dianne was reportedly found dead. Many people had reported that Mark William had arrived at the pool in the evening and had stayed in the pool well into when Dianne walked away with the man. As well as that, it's not just his friends saying this, it's other people who have no incentive to lie saying they saw him at the pool deck. However, as you saw by the photos, there were a couple other people in the group of friends that looked like Mark William. This moves us on to the second theory. The second theory goes basically the same as the main theory because it's at least undisputable how Dianne died. This theory states that it was another man who had dragged Dianne into the cabin, most likely one of Mark Williams' other friends who looked a lot like him. This is because, of course, they also had access to the room card. Another possible suspect is a crew member, as they would have access to all the cabins no matter what rank they are. This is actually a problem with many cruise ships, and many crimes that have occurred, like missing items or other things that have happened, have been due to crew abusing their powers. But I don't want to get into it too far, or else this video would get demonetized fast. The final theory is the most unlikely, and it's that Dianne had carried the drugs on board with herself and just found the cabin to go into because it wasn't her own, and the cabin might have been unlocked. Indeed, when the body was found, the door to the cabin wasn't unlocked. The main reason this is unlikely is mainly just because Dianne had never come into contact with the drug, and she was not known to do drugs. Eventually, the ship would be sold to Pullmantur Cruises in 2006 as the Sky Wonder. Then, she would be renamed Atlantic Star until in 2013 she was scrapped. With the cruise line successfully getting their way, the court case having been closed, and the Pacific Sky now being scrapped, the mystery of what happened to Dianne Brimble will tragically remain unsolved.